Amy got on a small private plane because of flight delays. There was a plane crash on the way. Amy opened her eyes and found the plane had tipped over. Fortunately, all 3 people were still alive, but the plane would soon sink to the bottom of the lake. Amy rushed to unbuckle her seatbelt and began to rescue the 2 pilots. Unfortunately, one of them was stuck in his seat and he had a steel pipe through his thigh. Amy could only watch him drown and could not do anything about it. The other one escaped, but he couldn't swim. Luckily, Amy arrived in time to drag him into the shore, but his thigh was pierced by metal and bled profusely. Amy immediately used a silk scarf to make a bleeding bag. Amy realized that they were in an endless primeval forest. Amy quickly took out her fruit phone and called 911. In the middle of the forest there must be no signal, so Amy fished out the man's phone. The result is still the same. Amy gathered some dry branches to make a fire, but the lighter wouldn't work. By nightfall, Amy picked some branches to cover her and the man. They spent the first night with difficulty. After dawn, the man woke up and said he had a stomachache. She realized that he had suffered serious internal injuries. It didn't take long for him to stop breathing. Looking at the endless primeval forest, Amy broke down and cried. Just then a photo floated in the water. It turned out that Amy was more than 2 months pregnant. She took the plane to tell her mother the news. But she missed her flight that day, so Amy took the plane, but the plane had crashed. Looking at her newborn baby, Amy thinks that the plane that sank at the bottom of the lake will have a satellite phone and a radio. If she could find them, she might be able to save herself. So she immediately stripped off her clothes and prepared to head to the bottom of the lake. But as soon as she got into the water, she screamed and ran to shore. It turned out the lake was too cold. In order to survive, Amy once again thought of a way. Amy pushed a piece of wood into the water, then held it towards the center of the lake, and swam quickly. After determining the right position, Amy plunged into the water. It turned out that there was a plane hidden at the bottom of the lake. She enters the cabin. Amy managed to find the radio, but she simply cannot take away. Amy had no choice but to take a few backpacks. Just as she was about to reach the shore, suddenly there was a roar. She turned around and looked. It was a brown bear. Amy yelled at the bear to leave, but the bear not only ate the only 2 cookies, but it pooped on her clothes. Then it went back towards the man on the ground. Amy completely panicked. She yelled at the bear again, but it went near the man left back to the forest. Amy first checked her backpack. It was all useless stuff. So Amy opened the other 2 backpacks. The result was shocking, as a backpack filled with money and one was filled with painkillers. She remembered how the 2 men had behaved at the airport. Amy seemed to understand something, but after all they had helped her. So Amy dug a hole to bury the man. Looking at the large amount of money in front of her, Amy suddenly thought of something. She was going to use the money to make a fire. After some efforts, the fire finally started. At this moment, Amy was happy like a child. Although there is a fire, but to survive in the wilderness, food and water is essential. Although there is fresh water everywhere, it had all kinds of animal droppings, so the water breed a lot of bacteria. Amy found a piece of plane wreckage. She finally drank boiling water. After pounding it with a stone, finally Amy went to the lake to catch fish with her bare hands. Obviously she was not good at it, so Amy made another fishing rod. It didn't take long for a fish to be hooked. Amy had no choice but to pick some wild fruits to eat. But she didn't know which one she could eat and which ones were poisonous and couldn't be eaten. She can only rely on her instincts. As a result, at night Amy began to vomit and got diarrhea. In her sleep, Amy saw a brown bear eating wild fruits. When she woke up, she suddenly realized she could tell which fruit she could eat by the bear's droppings. By nightfall, Amy came to the top of the mountain. She overheard a light in the distance. This proves that there may be people living there. After dawn, Amy headed for the light, but it didn't take long for her to get lost. After she got to the top of the mountain again and got her bearings, Amy suddenly remembered that her elementary school teacher had taught her how to tell the direction in the wilderness. She magnetized a needle and put it through a cork and put it into the water. A simple compass is now ready. But it didn't take long. Amy was exhausted. To reduce the weight, Amy started to throw away some useless items.
But she soon lost her way again, because the magnetism of the compass was gone. Suddenly there was a loud noise nearby. It scared Amy. She rushed to the tree. It turned out to be a raccoon. Just then a plane suddenly appeared in the air. Amy ran and shouted for help. But this is primitive jungle searchers, they could not see her. In the middle of the night Amy fell into a deep pit and fainted while running. Amy was awakened by a pain. She realized that her thigh was crushed by a rock. Her head was also injured. Fortunately her backpack was right next to her. Amy quickly took out a silk scarf and tied it around her head to stop the bleeding. But she couldn't get up. Just as she was desperate, a wisp of smoke suddenly floated by. She turned her head and saw that it was her mother. Her mother kept encouraging her. She hoped she could live. Seeing her mother's expected eyes, Amy's desire to live was rekindled. For the sake of her mother and the baby in her belly, Amy vowed to live. So she picked up a small stone and kept hitting the boulder in front of her. After a long time the boulder finally cracked. Amy pulled her legs out with all her might. But she couldn't climb up. Desperate, she threw away the bottle of medicine in her hand to vent her frustration. But it was this action that led her to a cave. Amy hurriedly went out. But what she didn't expect was the precipice outside the cave entrance. The rocks under her feet suddenly broke loose. Amy fell straight down. Just as she was about to get up, suddenly there was a sharp pain in her left leg. It was obvious that Amy's leg was broken. But she didn't give up. After countless attempts, Mai finally stood up. But she couldn't tell north from south. Suddenly Amy remembered that the light before was the north and the sun rises in the east and sets in the west. So she had to go north. After a long time Amy seemed to hear the sound of a car. So she hurriedly looked for the sound. It turned out that there was no car but the sound of water. Looking at the fast-flowing river in front of her, Amy cried in despair, but she didn't give up. Amy found a log and tried to swim to the other side. But just as she reached the middle of the river she was swept away by the current. So she gave up the resistance with the river flowing downstream. In the end Amy was rescued by two hunters and manages to survive.